When my husband married my best friend while I was in a coma, I woke up to a wedding invite with their picture on it. She needed comfort, he said coldly. I whispered, then you'll need a lawyer too. His face went pale as I slid the prenup across the table. My name is Mallory. I'm 52 years old, born and raised in Scranton, Pennsylvania. I was a registered nurse for nearly 30 years before life forced me to stop. It's strange how your life can seem ordinary on the outside, routine even, and yet somewhere deep beneath the surface, the ground is shifting and you have no idea until it opens up and swallows you whole. That's what happened to me. If you had asked anyone who knew us, they would have said Barrett and I were a solid couple. Dependable. Maybe even a little boring. We'd been together since I was 25, married since I was 28. We had 2 children, Devin and Reese, who, thankfully, were grown and living their own lives by the time everything went to hell. And we had the house. You know the kind, a little too big for us now, filled with old family photos, half-broken furniture no one wanted to throw out, and the faint scent of coffee grounds and cinnamon from a lifetime of mornings. Barrett wasn't a bad husband, not in any obvious way. He was quiet, methodical, and always predictable. I used to find comfort in that. He made the coffee at exactly 6:30 every morning. He paid bills a week before they were due. He watched the same golf tournament every year and fell asleep on the same side of the bed every night. That kind of man. I worked long shifts at the hospital and took on extra hours more often than I probably should have. Barrett never complained. Sometimes he even made dinner, chicken and rice or spaghetti, the only 2 dishes he could manage. Life wasn't exciting, but it felt safe. Steady. My best friend Priya lived 2 blocks away. We'd met in nursing school. She was the kind of friend you don't question. She showed up at 2 a.m. when Devin broke his arm falling off the monkey bars. She cried with me when my mother died. She laughed with me until we snorted wine when we watched bad reality TV. I trusted her with my kids. I trusted her with my life. I never once thought I needed to protect myself from her. I remember the day everything changed. It was a Tuesday in early March, the kind that still bites at your skin when you step outside, even though the calendar says spring is near. I wasn't feeling quite right when I woke up, but I figured it was the usual, stress, maybe dehydration, maybe just age creeping in. I brewed some chamomile, opened my laptop, and started reading a newsletter about joint pain. My eyesight blurred. A sharp pain hit the side of my head like a flash of lightning. The mug slipped from my hand, crashed onto the tile, and I hit the floor hard. That was the last thing I remembered for 7 weeks. I had a brain aneurysm. It ruptured. Emergency surgery saved my life, but the trauma left me in a coma. My children came. They sat by my bedside, held my hands, talked to me like I could hear them. My sister flew in from Portland. She brought my favorite lotion and read me old letters I'd written to her in college. And Barrett? Barrett came for the first few days. He sat in the corner quietly, said very little. Then one day, he just stopped showing up. I woke up in the hospital bed, dazed and fragile. My throat burned. My limbs felt like they were wrapped in sandbags. It took hours to fully understand what was happening. Days to sit upright without spinning. I was told I'd been unconscious for nearly 2 months. Reese was there when I woke up. Her hands were cold. Her eyes red and raw. She cried in little hiccups when I blinked and squeezed her fingers. That moment, despite everything that would come later, was pure. A kind of relief I'll never forget. For days later, a nurse wheeled in a cart with my personal items, mail, cards, a few trinkets from home. Reese volunteered to go through it, sorting the envelopes and tossing the junk. I wasn't paying attention. I was trying to keep down some lukewarm applesauce and decipher the news on the tiny wall-mounted TV. Then I heard her gasp. A small, strangled sound that didn't belong in that sterile room. She held up an envelope. Heavy, cream-colored, with gold lettering. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. It's from Dad, she said softly. I reached for it with trembling fingers, expecting a card. A welcome back note. Maybe even an apology for his absence. It was a wedding invitation. Barrett and Priya. April 14th. 2 weeks ago. A photo of them under an arbor of roses, smiling with clasped hands and radiant eyes. I couldn't breathe. My throat closed. My heart stuttered. The room spun. The nurse came running. The betrayal didn't land all at once, it came in waves. The first wave was disbelief. Then came anger. Then sorrow. But the worst was the slow, sickening realization that this hadn't been impulsive. They hadn't made a mistake in grief. This had been brewing. Planned. Barrett came 2 days after I opened that invitation. He walked in like a man showing up for a dentist appointment, distant, mildly inconvenienced. No flowers. No guilt. Just that same stiff posture and barely their voice. "You're awake," he said. That was it. I looked at him, saw a stranger. "You married her," I said. He didn't deny it. Didn't even blink. "You weren't coming back," he said. "She was grieving. It happened." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I whispered, "Then you'll need a lawyer too." He blinked once. Slowly, like he hadn't expected that. I reached into the drawer next to my hospital bed and slid out a manila folder I had asked Reese to bring me the day before. Inside it was a copy of the prenup Barrett had signed before we were married. He never took it seriously. My father had insisted on it because he didn't trust Barrett completely, not even back then. I hated that I finally understood why. Barrett didn't even finish reading before his face turned ghostly. He opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, but nothing came out. "You were unconscious," he said, finally. "And still your wife," I said. That was the last time I saw him in person. What followed was ugly. Mediation. Legal back and forth. Barrett wanted to fight the prenup, but the adultery clause was airtight and Priya, sweet, spineless Priya, refused to testify. I don't know if it was guilt or shame or the realization that she was now tethered to the man I was divorcing. Reese and Devin sided with me. They told Barrett they'd never forgive him. Devin sent one email, short and brutal. Reese blocked him entirely. Friends were split. Some of them didn't want to take sides. Some said they'd known something was off between Barrett and Priya for a while. One even admitted to seeing them together at a diner late at night a year before my aneurysm. I sold the house. I couldn't live among ghosts. I bought a small cottage in Clark Summit with a backyard and a quiet porch where I could sit in the mornings and just listen to the wind. The healing wasn't fast. It wasn't linear. There were days I wanted to scream until my throat gave out. Nights I stared at the ceiling, wondering how long it had been going on. How long I'd been a fool. How someone could hold your hand in the delivery room and still lie to your face over wine a decade later. The cottage I moved into wasn't much, a single-story place with chipped paint, a cracked front step, and a kitchen that still smelled faintly of mothballs. But it was mine. The windows were wide, the trees in the backyard swayed gently in the wind, and there was a bird feeder outside the kitchen window that quickly became my favorite form of entertainment. At first, the quiet was unbearable. I had spent so many years rushing through hospital shifts, through dinner prep, through the noise of family life, that silence had always been a luxury. But now, silence stretched like a blanket I couldn't kick off. It made the betrayal louder, made Barrett's absence more present, made Priya's silence feel like a scream. I tried to keep a routine. Woke up with the sun. Made tea. Did the small stretches my physical therapist had taught me. I kept a notebook beside the bed and started writing down my dreams, which were strange and fragmented. Sometimes I dreamed I was back in the hospital, unable to speak, while everyone around me laughed like I wasn't there. I got a call from my former colleague, Nadia, who'd heard about what happened and offered me a part-time admin job at the clinic just to keep me busy. I politely declined. I wasn't ready to go back into a world filled with patients, clipboards, and fluorescent lights. I wasn't even ready to go into the grocery store without feeling like people were whispering. Instead, I started walking. At first, just up and down the street, wrapped in an old coat. Then around the neighborhood. I'd pass elderly couples raking leaves, joggers with earbuds, teenagers throwing a football across someone's lawn. The world had kept moving without me. That was the hardest thing to grasp. It hadn't paused when I went under. It just kept turning unapologetically. Then one morning, while walking past the community garden near the elementary school, I saw a familiar car parked across the street. Priya's car. The same silver Subaru with the dent in the passenger door from when Devin had backed into it years ago. She was sitting inside, alone, engine running, eyes fixed on the garden. She didn't see me. Or maybe she did and just didn't want to acknowledge it. I stopped in my tracks, my breath catching for a second. She looked older. Or maybe just smaller. Her hair was pulled into the same loose braid she always wore when she was stressed. Her hands gripped the steering wheel like she was afraid of what might happen if she let go. I didn't move. I just watched her. After a minute, she looked down at something in her lap. Then, without looking up again, she drove off. I stood there long after the car was gone. I hadn't heard from her since the wedding invite. Not a single word. No apology. No message. Nothing. Until a week later, when an envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name written in her handwriting. That precise, slanted script I used to tease her about. Inside were 4 pages. It wasn't an apology in the traditional sense. There was no dramatic confession or groveling. It was more like a long, rambling thought she couldn't say out loud. She wrote that it hadn't started the way people might think. That they'd confided in each other about me, my stress, my exhaustion, how I'd shut down emotionally. She said it started with shared grief, concern, loneliness. And then one night, after too much wine, a line was crossed. I didn't plan it, she wrote. But I also didn't stop it. And that's the part that keeps me up at night. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't beg for anything. She just said she needed me to know that it hadn't been about love, at least not real love. That being with Barrett felt more like stepping into someone else's life than building her own. She said he'd changed. That the man she thought she wanted was a shell. That he snapped at her now, grew cold easily, and spent hours in the den not speaking. She ended it by saying she missed the version of us that used to exist. The late-night talks. The sisterhood. And that she knew she'd destroyed it, maybe permanently. I didn't write back. What could I say? That she was right? That she'd taken something sacred and set it on fire? Still, part of me wondered if she wrote it to be heard, or to relieve herself of guilt. The months went by, and I started to feel the cold lift from my bones. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it was sudden and vibrant. I planted flowers in the small front patch of my yard, watched birds come and go, started painting again, poorly but enthusiastically. And then one Saturday morning, while picking up an old easel from a garage sale a few blocks over, I met Raymond. He was tall, grizzled, maybe early 70s, with sunspots on his hands and a book of crossword puzzles sticking out of his coat pocket. He was looking at a set of antique dictionaries, and we struck up a conversation about old paper bindings. Turned out he'd been an English teacher for 35 years. Widowed. Had 2 grandkids who lived in Syracuse. He had a slow, careful way of speaking like every word mattered. We didn't flirt. We didn't exchange numbers. But a week later, he was sitting on my porch with a paper bag of scones from the bakery down the street and a smile that didn't ask for anything. We started meeting once a week. At first it was just coffee, then walks, then hours on the porch talking about poetry, gardening, movies. He never once asked about Barrett. And when I finally told him, months later, he didn't react with pity, just quiet understanding. He told me his wife had died of ovarian cancer 8 years ago. That she'd been his anchor, and he hadn't looked at another woman since. I thought I was done feeling things, he said one evening as we watched the rain hit the leaves. But then you said hello. It was the simplest thing. But it cracked something open inside me. Still, healing wasn't linear. Every now and then, I'd wake up with that heavy ache in my chest, a tightness I couldn't explain. Some nights, I'd stare at the wedding photo I'd hidden in the back of my closet. Barrett and Priya smiling. My absence glaring. One afternoon, while sorting through an old box, I found a letter Devin had written me when he was 15. In it, he thanked me for being the kind of mom who doesn't miss the hard stuff. That line stuck with me, because I had missed something. Not in my children's lives, but in my own. I had missed the slow unraveling of trust. The way Barrett grew more distant. The way Priya's hugs became quicker, less sincere. The quiet cues that said, something is wrong here. Maybe I hadn't wanted to see it. Or maybe I thought loyalty was a one-way road. After I found Devin's letter, I sat on the floor of my guest bedroom for a long time, surrounded by boxes I hadn't opened since the move. I reread it 3 times. The handwriting was a little crooked, the ink faded in places, but the words were unmistakable, filled with the kind of teenage honesty you only get once before life teaches you to hold things back. That letter reminded me of who I had been to my children. Someone they could depend on. Someone they felt safe with. Somewhere along the way, though, I'd stopped being that for myself. And now, all I wanted was to find my way back to her. I didn't stop thinking about Priya's letter, even though I told myself I had. It lingered in the corners of my thoughts. I hadn't seen her since the day she sat in that car outside the garden. Part of me wondered if she was hoping to see me, or if she had just been passing through, too afraid to knock on my door. A month later, I saw her again, unexpectedly. It was a Sunday morning. I was at the farmer's market on Depot Street, picking through a bin of tomatoes. The sun was out, people were smiling, kids were dragging their parents toward the kettle corn stand. It was one of those rare days when the heaviness didn't follow me out of the house. Then I turned and there she was. Priya stood by the honey booth, wearing that same tan cardigan she'd owned for years. Her hair was shorter now, and she looked thinner, almost fragile. She was with Barrett. They weren't touching. Just standing next to each other, a little too far apart for people supposedly in love. I froze. For a second, I thought about ducking behind the flower stall, avoiding the collision. But then Priya looked up and saw me. Our eyes locked. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She just looked tired. Like she hadn't slept in weeks. Barrett didn't see me at first. He was too busy squinting at a jar of honey, as if it might contain something he was missing. When he finally followed her gaze, his whole body stiffened. He looked like a man caught stealing from a church. I didn't walk toward them. I didn't wave. I just turned and walked away. Let them live with their choices. Let them rot in their honey. That evening, I called Reese. We hadn't talked in a week, she'd been busy with work, and I hadn't wanted to impose. But something about that market run-in left me unsettled, and I needed to hear her voice. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Mom. Everything okay?" Her voice had that mix of concern and patience she used when I called too early or too late. I hesitated. "I saw them today. At the market." A long pause. "Both of them?" she asked. "Yeah." More silence. Then she said, "Are you okay?" I wasn't sure how to answer that. So I told the truth. "I'm not angry. Not the way I used to be. But I still feel like someone reached into my chest and rearranged everything without permission." Reese let out a small, sad laugh. "You know what's wild? I don't even miss him." "Isn't that terrible?" "No," I said. "It's honest." She was quiet again, and then, out of nowhere, she added, "Devin talked to him." I sat up straighter. "What?" "When? Last week. Barrett reached out. Said he wanted to meet. They had lunch." That hit harder than I expected. I hadn't known. Devin hadn't said a word. "He didn't want to upset you," Reese added, reading the silence. I nodded slowly. "What did he say?" Reese sighed. "That Dad's not happy. That Priya's struggling. That it's not what he thought it would be." I swallowed. Did Devin believe him? He said he didn't care. He said, "Choices have consequences." A part of me wanted to be angry at Devin for keeping it from me. But the larger part, the one that had been hollowed out and stitched back together, understood. My kids were navigating this betrayal in their own ways, and they were allowed to protect themselves. That night, I took out the prenup again. It was already enforced, the divorce finalized, the assets split. But I found myself reading it like a map of who we used to be. All the clauses, the signatures, the dates. So much legal language to protect a love that didn't last. I wondered if Barrett kept a copy. If he looked at it sometimes. If he read it and realized how much he'd lost for someone who, by the sounds of it, was unraveling beside him. A few days later, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened to it, my heart skipped. It was from Priya's sister, Neela. "Hi Mallory, I hope it's okay, I'm calling." I didn't know who else to reach out to. Priya's not doing well. She's been in and out of the clinic. Anxiety. Depression. She won't talk to me, and I thought maybe you'd want to know. I sat with that message for a long time. I didn't call back. What would I even say? But I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Priya, alone in a house I once knew inside and out, probably pacing the halls, hearing echoes of a friendship that used to feel like family. By the next morning, I made a decision. Not to call her. Not to reach out. But to let her go. Really let her go. I walked into my backyard, pulled out the faded wedding invitation from the box where I'd stuffed it, and lit it on fire in my grill. I watched it curl and blacken, the smiling faces swallowed by flame. Not as revenge. Not as a ritual. But as a release. And just as the last ash floated into the wind, I heard a knock at my front door. The knock on the door startled me. It wasn't hurried or frantic, just a quiet, deliberate rhythm. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked slowly to the front, half expecting a delivery or maybe Raymond dropping by early. It wasn't either. It was Barrett. He stood there like someone who hadn't slept, wearing a wrinkled shirt and the same tired cologne he always overused when he was nervous. We didn't speak at first. He looked around like he'd forgotten how trees moved in the wind. Then his eyes landed on mine, and the weight of everything between us filled the space between the screen door. "Can I come in?" he asked. No, that surprised him. For a second, he blinked like he'd misheard me. I need to talk." I stepped out onto the porch, letting the door close behind me. "Then say it here." He shifted uncomfortably. "Priya left." I said nothing. "She packed up last week. Took the car. Said she needed space." He rubbed the back of his neck. "She's been distant for months." I thought she was just going through something, but now, I waited. Let the silence stretch. "She said I ruined her. That she can't even look at herself without seeing what she did to you." There it was. He wasn't here because he missed me. He was here because the walls were closing in, and he wanted me to validate him. Maybe even forgive him. I didn't. Instead, I looked him in the eye and said, "You made your choice." He nodded slowly, like he knew it was coming. "I didn't come to beg," he said after a moment. "I just thought you should know. That I was wrong. About everything." I leaned against the railing. "Wrong about what, exactly?" He hesitated. "About her." About you. About what I thought I wanted. I stared at him for a long moment. Then I said, when you married her, while I was still in the hospital, did you think I'd never wake up? His face paled. It wasn't like that. No. I tilted my head. Because it felt like that when I opened my eyes and saw your wedding photo instead of your face. He flinched, and for once, he didn't try to argue. Do you know what it's like, I continued, to realize the people you trusted most had rewritten your life without you? And then mailed you the ending? Barrett looked down at his shoes. I was scared. You were in that coma for so long. I didn't know what to do. You waited 6 months to move on. With my best friend. His voice broke a little. I didn't know how to be alone. I almost laughed. It was such a small, pitiful excuse. You didn't want to be alone, I said, so you let her crawl into the wreckage of my life and told yourself it was fate. We stood there in silence. The breeze lifted my hair. A bird landed on the railing between us, then darted off. Barrett shifted again. Is there anything I can do to make it right? I studied him, the sag in his shoulders. The way his eyes darted toward the door behind me, like part of him still thought I might ask him in. No, I said. There's nothing left for you here. He gave a slow, resigned nod. Okay. Then he turned and walked away. And I let him. The next few weeks were a blur of small triumphs. I donated every last photo of the two of them to a thrift shop 3 towns over. I painted the guest room a warm shade of yellow and turned it into an art studio. I blocked his number, along with Priya's, and let their names fall like dead weight from my phone. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from the lawyer who had helped me enforce the prenup. He sounded amused. You might want to come by the office, he said. There's been a little development. Turns out Barrett had been sloppy with his finances. Priya, in her depression and guilt, had refused to sign a postnup. Half of everything he'd tried to protect after our divorce was now tangled in debt, late fees, and a failed attempt at selling our old house without proper disclosure. You're no longer liable, the lawyer said, smiling. Your prenup held up beautifully. But he'll need to liquidate several assets, cars, stocks, the lake house, to cover the mess. I left the office with a calm I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about the money. It was about the poetic irony of watching someone who had discarded me now struggle under the weight of everything he thought he wanted. Raymond and I started spending more time together. He wasn't a replacement or a savior, just a quiet companion who listened without trying to fix anything. He helped me rebuild a little greenhouse in the backyard. We planted basil, tomatoes, and lavender. The smell of it clung to my hands long after the sun went down. One morning, while we were sitting on the porch drinking coffee, he said, "You ever think about reaching out to her?" I knew who he meant. I thought about it. No, I said finally. She made her decision. And now, she gets to live with it. I didn't say it with venom. Just truth. And that truth was enough. That fall, I hosted Reese and Devin for a long weekend. We made stew from the garden veggies, drank wine, watched old home movies. There were still moments when grief visited uninvited and unexpected. But they came less frequently, and they didn't linger like they used to. One evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I stood alone in the backyard, the stars sharp above me. I thought about everything I had lost. And then I thought about everything I had reclaimed, not through bitterness or rage, but through quiet, deliberate choices. Barrett and Priya would always have to live with the knowledge of what they did. But me? I had something they didn't. Peace. And that was the kind of revenge no court could grant and no apology could erase.